GTV presenta. GTV presenta. GTV presenta.
Good morning. This is the Contreras Report for the week of November 15th, 2021. I am Raul Lowry Contreras, your correspondent. The first subject we are talking about this morning is the absolute embarrassment the historically fabulous Republican Party has become under the leadership of Donald J. Trump. He and his cohort of people and what they believe are at best stupid politically, bordering on mental deficiency, mental illness. Secondly, we'll talk with the Washington Post writers group Ruben Navarrete about the federal indictment of Trump choirmaster Steve Bannon, former advisor and campaign manager of Donald J. Trump. He was indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 charges relating to his ignoring subpoenas from Congress. His claim he doesn't have to testify about what part he had in the January 6th mob attack on Congress. His claim is that he is protected and covered by executive privilege manifested by former President Trump. Of course, he's not. He wasn't in the government in January 2021. Therefore, he's not covered by executive privilege, even if it was legal and existed on that day. Then we'll wind up with some talk about the border reopening with Mexico and how the border government employees bungled the reopening and what can be done to improve border security and daily management while we are in fact fighting off the incompetence on the border by federal workers, officers that are incompetent and blind to how to manage the border. Let's start. What claims to be the Republican Party today is a gutless, spineless shadow of the Republicans who rallied for victory 2 years after Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater was creamed, was inundated, was flooded by the penultimate corrupt Democrat since racist Woodrow Wilson. Lyndon Baines Johnson was his name. I should know. Election night 1966 found me in a traveling party bus going between Republican candidate campaign offices, pouring California champagne to celebrate the great Republican victory of 1966. We celebrated winning state legislators like newcomer and future California Governor and U.S. Senator Pete Wilson, 2 congressmen and gubernatorial candidates in Michigan and Maryland named George Romney and Spiro Agnew. There also was an extra bottle of champagne to celebrate the election of jovial B-movie actor Ronald Reagan, governor of California. Though not on any ballot that year, former Vice President Richard Nixon, loser of the 1960 presidential election, was in 1966 a definite winner. He campaigned all over the country for Republican candidates for all federal and state offices. So many won, an instant national army was created that owed much to Richard Nixon, who was in the middle of a forthcoming 1968 presidential election. Nixon knew the American people were unhappy about the raging war in Vietnam, and that somehow he could use that as an issue to run for president in 1968. When he did run, he announced that he had a plan to end the war. He never detailed his plan, but his ordering troops home on the day he was inaugurated on January 20th, 1969 was a really good indication he planned to end the war. He planned to end John F. Kennedy's war when he became president, and he did. We Republicans had no idea Lyndon Johnson would not run for re-election or that Richard Nixon would benefit immensely by Johnson being run out of office by opponents in his own party, especially a senator named Eugene McCarthy. The name McCarthy is important to this essay because it was Wisconsin Senator Eugene McCarthy that stood up to an incumbent president and chased the president out of office. A previous senator from Wisconsin, Republican Joe McCarthy, had crawled out from an alcoholic cloud to historically set new records of sleaze. His allegation that the State Department was full of Moscow-led communist traitors to America was made in 1949, and despite his announcement that he had a list of the traitors, we never saw the list. I don't know how to explain that so many years after that happened in the late 40s and early 50s. But I want you to know that those of you who weren't alive then, those were really tough years because Joe McCarthy had a following, just like Trump, and they really caused a lot of friction. Now, communists were looked at very badly in those years, and there were investigations at the House and the Senate about these people and trying to find out who they were, and they found some. And they took away top secret clearances, and they had people fired. But there was an emotional drive behind this campaign that was not good for the country, as it turns out. But Joe McCarthy had his usefulness as a senator for some part of his Senate career, but he harmed America. McCarthyism still rings negatively in my head. Now, the opposite of the main opponents to the Vietnam War, Eugene McCarthy, was just the opposite of the main opposition to the Vietnam War. That was consisted mostly of bearded hippie men with long hair protesting their being called up by a decades-long conscription, a draft, like their fathers had in World War II. Eugene McCarthy took on his political party, his president, and won a lot of votes. He ran against an incumbent president. He ran an incumbent president out of office. Eugene McCarthy was a brave man. That in contrast to another senator from Wisconsin, Joe McCarthy, which I have just discussed. Joe McCarthy was a loser and led a ragtag following around the country that believed in him, and he lied through his teeth so many times and so negatively influenced a portion of his Republican Party that the Republican president of the United States had to reject Joe McCarthy. He slapped him around. Why? Because in 1949, Joe pulled a piece of paper out of his suit pocket at a speech in West Virginia and he waved that paper around and claimed he had a list of 211 communists working in the State Department. In other times it was 300, and other times it was 100, and so he never really settled on a number. But he never revealed those names that he claimed by name, that he had by name. There was no list. He made it up. He lied. President Dwight Eisenhower criticized McCarthy publicly. The U.S. Senate censured him, and so it goes. A year later or so, he died. During the 1949 to 1969 20 years, one good McCarthy and one bad McCarthy. Fast forward to today. Add another bad McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, Republican congressman from Bakersfield, California, and elected minority leader of the House of Representatives. He has crawled out from his cave to embarrass real Republicans and real Americans. On January 6, 2021, he was a national hero for many for assigning guilt and responsibility to then President Trump for the massive invasion of the Capitol of the United States by a ragtag group of Trump supporters. Within days, however, he flip-flopped into a butt-kissing gopher for the now former president, the man who lost the presidency in a great landslide, but lies every time he says a word about the election. He now resembles his Wisconsin Senator Joe, Tail Gunner Joe McCarthy, predecessor. Tail Gunner Joe flew one flight on a Marine airplane during World War II, and though he was an officer, he never flew again. The resemblance? Kevin is a gutless liar like Joe McCarthy. Where is the Kevin McCarthy that blamed Trump for the January 6th mob? Worse, He now has another embarrassment to the party to deal with, and he's doing nothing about it. From the Daily Beast, one of McCarthy's most extreme members, Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona, tweeted out a cartoon depicting him murdering Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, the Democrat of New York, and attacking President Joe Biden with swords. It prompted Democratic outrage and calls for McCarthy to respond. McCarthy hasn't said a word as of this moment. Rather, the GOP leader does face pressure within House Republicans to respond to two other events, to rebuke 13 Republicans who voted to fund roads and bridges, and to the lawmaker who publicly fantasized about chopping a colleague's head off. In the minds of some of the most pro-Trump Republicans, handling Democrats, that win amounts to treachery, the infrastructure bill passing. Many Republicans call any who voted for that as being traitors. Far more than anything Gosar did that's important to him. A group of them is preparing an internal GOP conference resolution to remove these Republicans from their committee assignments for voting for a bill to build roads and bridges. There are questions from both sides of the aisle about what leaders plan to do about Paul Gosar. As one senior GOP aide told the Daily Beast, quote, "We would be freaking out if the roles were reversed," unquote. McCarthy will probably do nothing, yet again putting Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, in the position of weighing whether to issue a partisan rebuke of an opposition member who the GOP decided to protect. In February, Democrats moved to boot Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, idiot Republican from Georgia, off her committees after a string of controversial episodes in which she, among other things, yelled at congressmen outside of the Capitol. House Republicans are emblematic of their forces McCarthy will have to manage if he takes the majority in 2022 in the 2022 midterms. He is tasked with leading two wings of the party that don't seem to follow his orders. If he moves to rein one in, he risks upsetting a delicate balance. McCarthy also risks upsetting the person whose support he needs to become Speaker of the House, Donald J. Trump. Trump is egging on the internal effort to punish the 13 Republicans. At a fundraiser for House Republicans' campaign arm on Tuesday night, he chastised the group for giving a win to Biden. One of them, Representative Nicole Maliotakis, Republican of New York, was in the audience. Part of the problem for McCarthy is he set expectations too high. It is said that McCarthy repeatedly told GOP members during private meetings that he had informed Democratic leaders they would have to put up the 218 votes needed to pass the infrastructure bill on their own before any Republicans supported it. That didn't happen. The fact is, only 215 Democrats voted for the infrastructure bill. It took 218 votes to pass. 13 Republicans voted for the bill. The bill passed because 13 Republicans voted for it, period. Without at least 3 of these Republicans voting for the bill would have failed. But is that a reason to punish these Republicans? And so now McCarthy has a faction of rabid Republicans who want to punish their colleagues because they voted for a bill that the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, and 18 other Senate Republicans supported. They voted yes. This all while the GOP conference gives Gosar a pass. One of the first acts McCarthy took when he became the House GOP leader in 2019 was to remove the longtime House GOP problem child, former Representative Stephen King, Republican of Iowa, from his committees. It wasn't one remark from King that did it. Rather, it was years of accumulated offenses that McCarthy said call into question whether he will treat all Americans equally without regard for race and ethnicity, quote unquote. King was bounced for the simple reason that the man is a through and through racist jerk that talked publicly about his racism. He made disparaging comments about any black or brown person or group that he could think of for years. The same could be said of Gosar, who has been the ultra-right pimple of the House of GOP for years now, pioneering a far-right posture on Capitol Hill before figures like Republican Representatives Green, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, and Matt Gaetz of Florida, who's facing his own federal investigation right now for sex with underage minors and sex trafficking. Every time, before they showed up, Gosar was, for example, associated with the far-right activist Nick Fuentes, whom the Justice Department has labeled a, quote, white supremacist, and spoke to a white nationalist conference where he was given a hero's welcome. He has called the deadly 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, a false flag set up by the left, attending meetings of right-wing militia groups, and was one of the first GOP lawmakers to downplay, even legitimize, the pro-Trump mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6. GOP leaders have ignored almost all of this behavior. Multiple sources have told the Daily Beast that Gosar's chief of staff, Thomas Van Flein, is the main source of the congressman's most toxic and terminally online social media content. A lawyer by training, imagine that. Van Flein has been with Gosar since he was sworn into office in 2011, serving as his chief of staff and lead counsel almost the entire time. The Alaska native's close ties with Sarah Palin brought him into Gosar's orbit. Van Flein served as the former Alaska governor's attorney and represented her in the so-called Troopergate scandal. He also did legal work for Rob Robinson, the Alaskan dentist who ran Gosar's 2010 campaign and introduced the candidate to Palin. During a crowded, competitive GOP primary for the seat, which unfolded at the height of the Tea Party movement, this unlikely contingent of Alaskan Gosar supporters helped deliver Palin's endorsement, which was crucial to Gosar's victory in Arizona. I don't know, you connect the dots. Through the last decade, Gosar has, quote, always been kind of crazy, and his office often, quote, a dumpster fire, said a former aide to the congressman, who recalled that Gosar and Van Flein often egged each other on in terms of how outrageous their messaging could be. McCarthy's dilemma, McCarthy now faces, is a tough decision. On his right, he has members calling for retribution for the Republicans who handed Democrats a win. Trump, whose favor McCarthy desperately needs, is out for vengeance too. But McCarthy also has centrist Republicans who are disgusted by Gosar's video and his long-running list of offenses and want McCarthy to do something now. Not to mention the fact that Democrats might actually act as they did to Green. All Democrats could simply vote to kick Gosar out of his committee assignments like they did the sweetheart wicked witch of Georgia. Besides that, they could actually expel him from Congress. They don't need a two-thirds majority. All they need is 218 votes. Nearly 30 Democratic lawmakers have announced they would introduce a resolution to censure Gosar during the next House session. Quote, as the events of January 6th have shown, such vicious and vulgar messaging can and does foment actual violence, said the lawmakers led by Representatives, Ayanna Pressley, Democrat of Massachusetts, and Jackie Speer, Democrat of California, adding that Gosar's actions amounted to a clear-cut case for censure. Minority Leader McCarthy's silence is tacit approval and just as dangerous, they said. Many Democrats would prefer to keep pressure on McCarthy to act, but some privately say that there would be plenty of support for censoring Gosar if he does nothing. Pelosi's office pointed the Daily Beast to a recent statement from the Speaker in which she called for probes into Gosar by the House Ethics Committee and by law enforcement. A senior GOP aide described the dilemma this way. If Democrats force a vote on censuring Gosar or removing him from his committee assignments, McCarthy will have to decide if he wants to allow a vote that would connect every Republican and the GOP brand to far-right gadflies, or if he'll throw him, Gosar, to the wolves of the Democratic caucus. The latter outcome could embolden calls from the far right to punish the 13 Republicans who voted for infrastructure as a sort of tit for tat. McCarthy likely doesn't want to remove those 13 Republicans from committees. Some of them are the most vulnerable in the GOP conference in the November election of next year, and he would be hard-pressed to build a majority in 2022 without them. Within many House GOP circles, few expect that any of these lawmakers are at risk of facing any form of rebuke at the hands of their colleagues, and several sources downplayed the seriousness of the push. The potential targets also dismissed them. This is a small group of members who are making loud noises, Representative Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, says. There is a real frustration within the GOP ranks over the yes votes. However, and a sentiment of the 13 lawmakers gave Biden a win when they could have easily handed him an embarrassing loss. Still, according to another senior House Republican aide, the episode is not worth dwelling on and risking narratives of the GOP dysfunction. Quote, they took a stupid vote and bailed out the speaker, the aide said of the 13. But to say they saved Nancy Pelosi's majority is a joke. But McCarthy may have trouble ignoring the calls for blood, especially when Republicans know that Democrats can force their hand on Gosar by moving a censure resolution or legislation to strip him of committees to the House floor. At the beginning of the year, when Green faced similar punishments in the GOP conference, McCarthy tried to appease everyone by defending Green while also defending then number 3 Republican Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming, who had just voted to impeach Trump. That gambit worked for a bit until Cheney kept disparaging Trump. If past this prologue, McCarthy will delay any decision as much as possible until enough Republican members, or Trump himself, force him to act. In any event, there is probably one winner in McCarthy's lose-loss situation, Gosar. And it's likely that the same will be said of any of the MAGA champions whose antics force a similar situation going forward. Kevin McCarthy is a gutless wonder. He must wonder is he even a real Republican, a real American? A real American would grab Congressman Gosar by his private parts and shake Gosar's stupidity out of him. He would then move to take away his committee assignments. If Gosar said one public word challenging McCarthy, McCarthy should introduce a bill to expel Gosar from Congress. A real man, a real American, would do that. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Regresamos.
Chelón Abel, en armonía con la naturaleza. Productos para tu salud y belleza. Ofrecemos productos de alta calidad a precios muy accesibles. Servicios, ventas, capacitación y afiliaciones. Afíliate y conoce una nueva forma de vivir.
Mi nombre es Laura Vizcarra, tengo 18 años en el mundo de la micropigmentación y actualmente soy artista film. Si tú estás interesada en hacer microblading, es venir conmigo, hacer una consulta y una valoración previa y así poderte explicar más del procedimiento de microblading. ¿Quieres lucir unas cejas hermosas? Te invito a que me visites en Meraki Beauty Salón, es gratis, te esperamos.
GTV Televisión Online tiene para usted la solución a sus necesidades de publicidad. Tenemos un alcance real de 22,000 seguidores y un alcance potencial de 140,000 vistas. Como productos comerciales tenemos para usted espacios publicitarios de 20, 30 y hasta 40 segundos durante los cortes de los programas, videos comercial para negocios, cintillos, menciones y banners durante los programas, presencia y uso de marca, cobertura de eventos especiales para su negocio. Los beneficios de construir su estrategia publicitaria con nosotros son: posicionamiento de marca, llegar a nuevos clientes potenciales, inversión económica de bajo costo, oportunidad de cross-selling e incremento de ventas. Contáctenos para conocer nuestros atractivos paquetes publicitarios. Nuestros aliados comerciales de Supera con gusto lo atenderán en el correo comercialización@supera.com.mx.
Regresamos.
Welcome back. Joining us is Ruben Navarrete from the Washington Post Writers Group. His career as a journalist and radio talk show host began when he graduated from Harvard. He has worked as a reporter and editorial writer for the Arizona Republic, the San Diego Union, the Dallas Morning News, and CNN. He currently, besides his 2 columns a week, contributes to the Daily Beast. His nationally distributed columns are read by a lot of people. He is the #1 read Hispanic columnist in the nation. I'm number 2. So viewers are assured of the best Hispanic political thought in the United States of America. Ruben, what do you think about Steve Bannon, former presidential advisor, being indicted by a federal grand jury for ignoring a congressional subpoena?
Raul, great to be back with you again. This is exactly what you said would happen a few weeks ago when we talked about this. You said that a congressional subpoena to testify was nothing to be messed with, and that Steve Bannon was risking being apprehended, arrested, and now being indicted for contempt of Congress. So I think it's significant that the Democrats are drawing a line. They're serious about holding people accountable for January 6th. They want to know what Steve Bannon knew, what Donald Trump told him. They want to know specifically about whether they can draw a direct line from the events of January 6th, this violent insurrection, to the former president. And they're doing it not just to look backward, but also to prepare for the future. And this idea somehow that President Trump may run for president again. So this is kind of a Democratic insurance policy, just in case he does that. But the other point of this, I think that's important, Raul, is certainly there is a tension that exists in politics between looking backward and looking forward. And I think that likewise, Republicans oftentimes look backward when they should be looking forward. And a lot of the Republicans who think the last election was stolen, they're looking backward. And there's a debate going on in the Republican Party saying, no, we're never going to win that way. We have to look forward. And so that's the tension that exists. And for Democrats, they have a choice to make too. Do you guys want to continue to look at January 6th? Or do you want to look at things like the victory of Glenn Youngkin, the governor now and governor-elect in Virginia, and how it is that he won by talking about grocery tax and gas tax and education? Maybe those are what the things you should be focused on, not January 6th. I don't have an answer for this. I just know that there's a choice. Do you want to look forward or do you want to look backward?
Well, I think, first of all, I think January 6th is one of the most important dates in American history, besides my birthday, January 15, 1941. But I really, really think so. And I think that they can. There are legislative solutions to part of those problems that occurred on January 6th. And there is, for example, a tightening up of the insurrection law, which is it's over 200 years old. And it was passed in the early 1800s, as I recall, I think 1807 or so. So I think that can be tightened up because, for example, a lot of the supporters of January 6th will look around innocently and say, well, nobody was armed. Well, tell that to police that were struck and injured by poles and clubs,
hockey sticks,
whatever, and police batons that they took away from the police. What kind of weapon you're armed with should be stipulated in a law. In other words, anything that if you touch another person, in this case an officer, with anything but your hands, that should be a separate charge. If you strike a federal officer, an FBI guy or an IRS guy, If you hit one, that is a federal crime unto itself, and that's with your fist, not with a weapon. That's another charge.
All this is true. Accountability is important. You see it just this week, Raul. You saw the story about the fighter, the street fighter who hit got the longest sentence so far. I believe it was 18 months. So that's good that you arrest these people, that you prosecute these people, that you hold them accountable. I'm talking about the effect of politics and how it plays up on politics, because just like there's a tendency among the Republicans to look back at the last election and say, oh yeah, that election was stolen. Donald Trump was really the person who was elected. We need to look at Arizona, and we need to do an audit in Arizona of the election. There is a sense the parties kind of lose the electorate. They lose the voter because the voter is worried about their bills every month, month to month, and they're worried about real issues today, and they're not worried about January 6th anymore. So it's kind of a case where you could win the battle and lose the war. I agree with you. There should be accountability for January 6th. I also agree that it's a very dangerous strategy when either political party spends all their time looking backward and offers me nothing as a voter about what lies ahead looking forward.
Well, I think politically, you're probably right. And the Biden administration so far has not reached that conclusion. But we're talking about Congress here. Congress has got a job to do, and that's one thing. But the Biden administration has totally screwed up their presentation to the public. I mean, this infrastructure bill so far hasn't affected anybody. But some money will start to be spent within the next few weeks by agencies. They will be looking at plans, and if they won't listen to me, but if they were listening to me, they would make a really big deal about this. The president going to Michigan this week to sell his infrastructure bill, the bill passed. He doesn't need to sell it. What he needs to sell is its effect. And that is to go into Grand Rapids, for example, where they're going to fix the water supply and stand there at the water plant and say, we're going to fix the water situation here in Grand Rapids, and have state people say, yeah, here are the plans, and this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to start in 97 days or something like that. That's the kind of politics that I'm talking about. That's retail stuff, selling your best, putting your best foot forward. And they're not doing that. But let's change the subject a little bit. We got a congressman from Arizona, Paul Gosar. And I talked about him in the first segment of today's program. And I'd like to know what you have to say about it, because you are a former reporter and editorial writer for the Arizona Republic, which is the main newspaper in Arizona. So give us your Arizona view, or your Arizona veteran view of Paul Gosar.
Well, you see, Raul, this dynamic at play where what plays in Arizona, what's comfortable there, what may make or get a chuckle from Arizona Republicans who support Gosar, could get him in trouble, nationwide. And here that's the case because he was circulating a tweet that showed basically a caricature of him killing a fellow member of Congress. And that's Alexandria Ocasio Cortez from New York. And so it may play in Peoria, as they say, in Arizona, that this is something that he thought was harmless, but ultimately it's something that AOC and others pointed to as an example of Republican extremism, that Democrats are smart. They know that hurts Republicans with independence. It hurts them with even Republican women in many cases who do not like these personal attacks and just want people to do business, just go do work. Why are we sending you to Congress to go do work and to help make my life better, not to engage in these sophomoric games about jokes about killing a fellow member of Congress. And so the Democrats are smart. They have seized on this example to point this kind of extremism. The Republicans are shrugging it off, saying, oh, it's no big deal. They're making too much out of it. But this is another clear example of what playing at home, something that may play well at home, or at least not hurt you at home, could hurt your party on a national level.
For those who are watching this that aren't familiar with Arizona, ladies and gentlemen, there is a Peoria in Arizona.
There is a Peoria in Arizona.
It's a suburb. Yeah, it's a suburb of Phoenix. And in fact, that's where the San Diego Padres have their winter training program. They've built a ballpark there and all that, and that's where Major League Baseball starts now. The old days of Florida, the Grapefruit League, and all that.
Right.
Those days are all
Now it's
gone.
Arizona.
Most are in Arizona. Now, let me reiterate what you said. And what Paul Gosar did was put up a tweet with an anime cartoon showing him killing and cutting off the head of Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. I love saying that. And then attacking the President of the United States. Now, let's compare him to Stephen King, former Republican congressman from Iowa, whose big mouth, how should I put it? Racism came out of his mouth with every other word and every other sentence. Finally, the Republicans got tired of it, and Kevin McCarthy kicked him off of all his committee assignments. So all he did was sit around and watch CNN all day because he wasn't allowed to do his job. And then he ran for re-election and was finally kicked out of office. The call now by Nancy Pelosi and others is that Paul Gosar should be stripped of his committee assignments and put into congressional purgatory, and that's what this deal is all about. Do you think that he should be stripped of his committee assignments?
Yes. I think that's appropriate for a couple of reasons. One is the Republican Party used to believe in accountability. In the 1990s, they talked my ear off about how, if it was African Americans or Latinos and it was street crime, the issue was accountability. You needed to have tough sentencing laws because people need to take responsibility for their actions. You can't have amnesty, they said. Republicans don't like amnesty, they said, because you shouldn't reward bad behavior. And people who come to the country illegally should not just be able to stay. We need accountability. And so now I take that same Republican, prayer book and I play it against them. And I say, this needs accountability. You can't let this person get away with it. But the other reason I think it's important is because of what we said earlier about January 6th. You have to understand that the idea of threatening violence against a member of Congress now, today, in November of 2021, means something different than it did 10 years ago, or even, a year ago, 2 years ago. So because of January 6th, it's much more plausible that some fanatic could look at this video and think it's okay to hurt members of Congress, literally try to storm the Capitol, yelling about the Vice President of the United States, hang Mike Pence. This was not just attacking Democrats. This was saying, get Mike Pence out of the Capitol and hang Mike Pence. So I don't think this is the time for lawmakers to joke about violence onto other lawmakers. So I could make a strong argument that for those two reasons, he should be stripped of his committee assignment and probably more.
Good. Well, listen, we got a couple of minutes left, and I've asked the other question in my mind that I'd like to hear your answers to, but let's you pick a subject to give us 2 minutes that you want to rant about or discuss or whatever, demand accountability for.
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on right now. One is regarding critical race theory, and that's an outgrowth of the Virginia governor's race, and the fact that let's just start there, that Americans have reached a point where they don't want to have this conversation. They don't know what to say about it. They don't know how to talk about race in America. We've gone from a time period in your lifetime, Raul, where you were growing up, white people, all they did was talk about race. All they did was say, as a Mexican, you can't go into that barbershop or that swimming pool or that restaurant. And now we're at a different place at this point in your life where white people don't want to talk about race. And they don't want to talk about critical race theory, and they don't want to talk about race in education or public schools or any of these things. And they get nervous when you talk about things like systemic racism and policing. And so this has become now a national topic, a discussion, not just because of what happened in Virginia, but it's on my mind because I'm writing a column about it this week. And I'm just struck by the fact that Black people and brown people seem to have a better understanding of what critical race theory is than the white people who are against it. So I'm fascinated that a bunch of people are against something that they can't define. They can't explain it. They don't know what it is, but they know they don't like it. And that's where we are in America today.
Well, let me just say that as a 9-year-old, I was in Texas, on my first visit there of many, and a barber refused to cut my hair. And I was 9 years old. Now, you tell that to a white person, and they go, oh, that really happened? Yes, that really happened to me, you know. And so anyway, Ruben Navarrete, we welcome you here periodically, and we trust that the audience does too. We now have a major statewide audience in the state of Baja California, so we have a lot of people watching this, and you're getting well known in your own backyard. Thank you, Ruben Navarrete, for being with us, and we will see you again in a couple of weeks. We're going to take a break now.
Thank you, my friend.
Regresamos.
Pastelería Riviera, con más de 40 años deleitando tu paladar, especializados en exquisitos pasteles para toda ocasión. Además, elaboran riquísimos postres y bocadillos para cafeterías, restaurantes o cualquier evento. Pregunta por sus paquetes. Visítalos en Boulevard Aguacaliente, esquina Avenida Negrete, local 1 y 2, Tijuana, a un costado del correo. Pastelería Riviera.
Mi nombre es Laura Vizcarra, tengo 18 años en el mundo de la micropigmentación y actualmente soy artista film. Si tú estás interesada en hacer microblading, es venir conmigo, hacer una consulta y una valoración previa y así poderte explicar más del procedimiento de microblading. ¿Quieres lucir unas cejas hermosas? Te invito a que me visites en Meraki Beauty Salón. Es gratis, te esperamos.
El café del Moreno le pone sabor a su vida. Venga a conocer nuestra nueva sucursal en Otay. Estamos por la subida de la central camionera frente a la plaza Otay Alameda. Contamos con una gran variedad de deliciosas bebidas y postres. También nos encuentras en Plaza Río, frente a Burger King.
Regresamos.
We are back. Let's talk about the border. As the universe knows, the border was open to vaccinated Mexicans and Canadians on November 8th. Did the government, the U.S. government, assign enough badge and gun-toting customs and border protection people to handle those crossing the border into the U.S., many for the first time in over a year? Did it? We don't know. What we do know is that someone didn't get the memo that the border was opening up. The average time crossing wait at the San Isidro border crossing from Tijuana 2 days after the border opened was 135 minutes, 2 hours, 15 minutes. If you weren't a member of the U.S. government's exclusive $125 Century Pass program, then it only took 15 minutes. Some weeks prior to the 135-minute wait, the wait time was double and triple that. On this day, the government's 32 crossing lanes that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build over years weren't all open, despite the several weeks' notice the border was opening up to vaccinated Mexicans. Only 6 lanes were open in the early afternoon, 2 days after the border was open. 6 out of 32 lanes. Additionally, pedestrian lines at the crossing and at the Otay Mesa crossing were literally 2 or more kilometers long. Tijuana police had to close several streets leading up to the border to the border crossings to bring some sort of rationality to the crowds wanting to cross the border to do the most dastardly thing a Mexican would want to do in the United States. That would not be an illegal border crossing into the U.S. It would be to spend millions of dollars in the U.S. every day. They can cross the border, even if they have to spend 135 minutes in a car burning millions of gallons of gasoline and polluting the air for 135 minutes. These millions of people pay millions in state sales taxes and federal excise taxes, including gas taxes, because gas is less expensive in California than in Mexico. Before the pandemic, 1.5 million people crossed the border every day in both directions. The pandemic brought with it a closure of the border for many people. The economic cost was unbelievable. Millions of dollars spent by day visitors from Mexico and Canada along both borders were lost. Thousands of businesses folded, throwing people out of work. Millions of dollars normally paid into unemployment insurance, workmen's compensation funds, and taxes withheld for Social Security and income taxes seriously negatively were dented state and federal treasuries. So rather than reopening the border by manning more gates and cutting waiting times for car driving entrance and pedestrians crossing the border, what we found during that first week of the border opening is a sheer incompetence by so-called veteran border staffs that appeared not to care at all about the wasted time of millions of people and the money they want to spend in the United States and the taxes they voluntarily pay for the privilege. This is not a Biden administration problem. This has been going on for over 50 years through administrations of both political parties. I know. I have spent a significant portion of my life sitting in a car, engine running, so I could get back into the U.S. from Tijuana. I first ran into the problem when, as a new San Diego State University graduate, I was hired by the Caliente racetrack in Tijuana, Mexico, as a public relations executive. That required me to be at the track doing horse and dog racing 5 days a week. 4 days a week required my presence in the San Diego office, so sometimes I put in part day there and then I'd go down to the track either in the evening for dogs or the daytime for horse racing. Thus, I crossed the border in both directions 5 times a week and 20 times a month for 4 years. Then came the Nixon administration in 1968, and a cutthroat future convict, G. Gordon Liddy, the Nixon administration initiated Operation Intercept. Every single car was to be searched that crossed the border, every single person interviewed, every single document examined. Directing the project was Liddy, who wound up in federal prison, of course. You all know that story from the Watergate years. And he refused to testify. Steve Bannon, watch out, because Gordon Liddy wouldn't testify as to who gave him the orders to do the illegal things that he did. Operation Intercept caused waits of up to 8 hours to drive across the border. Our business at the track was devastated. We lost 40% of our business on weekends. My pay, along with all 1,500 employees, was cut by the same 40%. So we have been there before. What is going on now is the same, only with a larger border crossing and far more border guards. With the biggest difference, those people are unionized now. So the incompetent Border Patrol and Customs Border Protection people are screwing up, and there is nothing we can or the administration can do about it. That's why at the 3 border crossing lanes last week, only 6 were open. At the 32 crossing lanes, only 6 were open at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Shifting a bit, Stephen Miller, the self-hating grandson of Russian immigrants to the U.S., is stirring up the border by suggesting the Biden administration is not working the border like his boss, President Trump, did. He claims on Fox News that the border was secured better than ever while Trump was in office. That is a lie. Illegal crossers made it through the border every day. Perhaps not as many as before, but they did. And so did all the drugs flowing across the border. In fact, the flow of drugs increased under Donald J. Trump. Moreover, and more importantly, Miller's advice to Trump was to throttle the border to legal immigrants. Don't believe these clowns when they say that they're against illegal immigration. They're all for legal immigration. They aren't. They're lying about it. They violated law and legal decisions on asylum, for example. They shut down immigration by religion, which is illegal. And they had to redo that to meet the court's requirements of legality. They violated the Flores Agreement on children caught at the border and kidnapped them. Yes, the Trump administration kidnapped children. Negotiations are in progress right today to make them whole, those families. And all kinds of money has been discussed, but the amounts of money are unimportant at this point because the negotiations are ongoing. The fact is that Mexican and other children were kidnapped by federal officers of the United States under the direction of Donald J. Trump's administration. They broke the law. Somebody has to pay. So that'll come up soon. And the thing is that unlike our German opponents in World War II, these guys didn't keep any paperwork. That's why families haven't been reunited now, a year after Trump lost the election. They sent federal troops. The Trump people sent federal troops to the border to stand around and watch soldiers and Marines install barbed wire over other barbed wire. The troops did not enforce any laws because they are prohibited from doing so thanks to white slave owners who dictated that prohibition to protect their precious white privilege in the 1870s. National Guardsmen spent their millions of payroll dollars on answering phones, sweeping floors, emptying trash cans, and watching untrained Border Patrol agents shoot tear gas canisters at women and children on the Mexican side of the border. Miller says the Biden administration is flunking on the border because it seems to be overly concerned about refugees in Europe being held hostage by communists at the Polish border more than those crossing the border with Mexico. 2 million border crossers apprehended last year meets records set in 2000 by 5,000 border agents. It takes 20,000 now, with most surrendering. Most of the people they're detaining, you notice they don't use the word arrest, most of the people they're detaining are voluntarily surrendering to anyone with a badge and a gun. They find them, they look for them. And then they turn themselves in because they want to apply for asylum under U.S. law. That's the law, folks, the law that President Trump ran around and didn't enforce. He did his best to keep legal people from immigrating to the United States because all he wanted was people from Norway to come, not from the S-hole countries that he described like Haiti, Iraq, Syria, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, even though many of those people were fleeing dictatorships, left-wing communist dictatorships like in Nicaragua. That didn't matter to him. The shining city on the hill, the United States of America, was more important to protect from immigrants like his mother and like Stephen Miller's grandparents. That's it for today. We want to thank you for being there this Sunday and every Sunday at 10 o'clock on courtesy of TV in Tijuana, Mexico, and CNR Cable. Thank you for being there. We'll see you next week.
Regresamos.
Abel, en armonía con la naturaleza. Productos para tu salud y belleza. Ofrecemos productos de alta calidad a precios muy accesibles. Servicios, ventas, capacitación y afiliaciones. Afíliate y conoce una nueva forma de vivir.
Pastelería Riviera, con más de 40 años deleitando tu paladar, especializados en exquisitos pasteles para toda ocasión. Además, elaboran riquísimos postres y bocadillos para cafeterías, restaurantes o cualquier evento. Pregunta por sus paquetes. Visítalos en Boulevard Aguacaliente, esquina Avenida Negrete, local 1 y 2, Tijuana, a un costado del correo. Pastelería Riviera.
Regresamos.
Thank you for being there. Every week we look forward to joining you to discuss the important issues of the day. Today we talked about the border, we talked about the Republican Party, and a few political gems here and there. Again, thank you for being there, all of you, and we will be with you in a week. We will then cover as many subjects and ideas and freedom for all people that we can. That is our motto, libertad y tierra, as Emiliano Zapata said over 100 years ago. Not so much the tierra, but the libertad part keeps us alive, keeps me working hard so that I can do whatever I can to protect freedom, whether it be in the United States, Mexico, Syria, South Africa, it doesn't matter. That's what we're here for. Thanks again to GTV in Tijuana and to CNR Cable in Baja California. See you next week.